Hey guys. Tonight, we begin with a time when your doctor's prescription was more likely to kill you than cure you. It's Victorian England, where cough syrup came with a dash of heroin, teething medicine was basically morphine, and cocaine was just everywhere. The world is smoky, restless, and very, very high. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft, steady hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations! You've just stepped into a world where the pharmacy was the most dangerous place in town. You don't so much arrive in Victorian London as you stumble into it. And the first thing that greets you isn't a gentleman with a top hat or a lady with a parasol. It's the smell. A damp, choking cocktail of coal smoke, horse dung, rotting vegetables, and something chemical that pricks the back of your throat. Welcome to the 19th century, where progress was proudly paraded in the newspapers, but reality smelled like someone boiled despair in a dirty sock. The fog hangs low, not the delicate mist of a romantic painting, but a greasy yellow, brown haze that turns every gas lamp into a blurred high-low. You rub your eyes and cough into your sleeve, which doesn't help, because your sleeve now smells like the city too. Somewhere nearby, a cart clatters over cobblestones, the horse snorting like it resents having to breathe this air. Children dart past with bare feet and grimy faces, shouting something that could be playful or desperate. You can't quite tell. And then, just at the edge of the crowd, you notice it a door, half hidden in shadow, marked by a lantern with glass so dusty it barely glows. A place where people go not to escape the fog outside, but the fog inside their own minds. You linger, hesitating. You've barely been here 10 minutes, and already Victorian London is offering you drugs. Which, frankly, is quicker service than some modern cities. The doorway is narrow, its paint flaking, the wood swollen from damp. You duck your head and step inside. Instantly the world changes. The air is heavier, thicker. Smoke curls like lazy ghosts, and the smell is sweet, almost pleasant at first. Then cloying, bitter underneath, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. Your eyes adjust to the gloom, and you see the men sprawled on benches, women draped across cushions, a few curled like cats in corners. An opium den. Your first stop on this little time travel adventure. Don't say I didn't warn you. A man behind a counter nods at you. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't ask your business. He just gestures to the back, where pipes are being handed out like bread rolls. You realize quickly that Victorian London isn't squeamish about this stuff. Opium dens weren't whispered secrets. They were more like the worst, kept secrets in the city. Everyone knew they existed, and the police, more often than not, were happy to be bribed into forgetting them. You settle onto a cushion beside a man whose waistcoat might once have been fashionable. Though now it's just another layer of dust. His eyes are half shut, his lips moving in some dream, language you can't quite follow. You notice the pipe in his hand. The long stem stained dark at the end where the bowl smolders faintly. When he exhales, the smoke rolls over you, warm and perfumed, carrying the promise of escape. And it hits you, this isn't some shadowy underworld accessible only to rogues and thieves. This is mainstream Victorian life. Clerks, factory workers, even housewives. They all dipped into opium, laudanum, morphine. Drugs were not just tolerated, they were practically recommended. Have a cough. Try heroin syrup. Trouble sleeping. A drop of laudanum in warm milk. Baby teething. A spoonful of soothing syrup, laced with morphine. You get the sense that the Victorians considered drugs less of a vice and more of a multi-tool, like duct tape, but for every problem in existence. You might be thinking this sounds shockingly reckless, and you'd be right. But remember, this was an age when people thought arsenic made a nice facial powder and mercury cured syphilis. By comparison, opium probably seemed like chamomile tea. Your new companion on the cushion finally notices you. His pupils are tiny, his gaze unfocused, but he grins with a lazy familiarity, as though you've shared a dozen nights in this den before. Dreams. He whispers, his voice soft as a thread unraveling. That's what it is. Better dreams than the world outside. His words slip into your ears, heavy with meaning. The Victorian world outside these walls is brutal. Factories that grind workers into dust, streets that reek of disease, a society obsessed with appearances but rotting underneath. In that context, maybe a pipe of opium wasn't just indulgence. Maybe it was survival. You lean back and take in the room more fully now. There's a woman in the corner, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, a bottle of laudanum clasped in her hands like a holy relic. She sips it slowly, eyes closed, as though each drop lifts her further from the weight pressing her down. Laudanum, after all, was the respectable drug, the one you could buy over the counter in any pharmacy. A tincture of opium mixed with alcohol, sold in ornate bottles that made it look almost glamorous. Doctors prescribed it, mothers trusted it, poets wrote under its spell. And in every drop was the same sticky truth: addiction, disguised as medicine. If you're thinking this is the part where the narrator shakes their head and judges the Victorians, think again. Before you get too smug, remember your own age isn't much better. You call them painkillers and sleeping pills, but the principle isn't so different. The Victorians just lacked glossy pharmaceutical ads with soothing voice, overs telling them to ask their doctor. A clatter breaks your thought. A young boy, no older than 12, hurries through the den with a tray of pipes and bottles. His cheeks are hollow, his eyes wide, darting between customers like he's both part of this world and terrified of it. You realize children weren't shielded from any of this. Victorian families dosed their infants with opium syrup to keep them quiet, and some never woke up again. Imagine putting your baby to bed with a spoonful of death and calling it childcare. But you can see why they did it. Poverty crushed families into desperation, and silence was sometimes the only luxury they could afford. That small bottle of syrup promised peace, until it didn't. The man beside you exhales another plume of smoke, and for a moment you feel dizzy yourself. The air is a patchwork of sighs, murmurs, half-formed laughter. It's strangely peaceful, if you can forget that every breath here is a step closer to decay. The den isn't a den at all, you realize. It's a refuge, a sanctuary, an escape hatch from a world that offered too much suffering and too little hope. And yet, it's also a trap. The boy with the tray passes again, and you catch his eye this time. There's something in his stare, a warning, maybe, or envy that you'll walk back out into the night, while he'll stay here until dawn, breathing other people's dreams. You wonder how long before he stops carrying the tray and starts carrying a pipe of his own. You decide it's time to step outside, before the smoke seeps too far into your lungs. The street air isn't fresh, exactly, but it feels sharper, colder, almost cleansing after the syrupy haze inside. The fog curls around your boots as you walk, muffling the sound of the city. Somewhere, a church bell tolls, but the sound is swallowed by the distance. Victorian London at night is a living thing, restless, unpredictable, a creature of shadow and light. You pass shop windows shuttered against thieves, pubs spilling music and shouting into the street, and alleyways where the unlucky curl up to sleep. Above it all, the faint orange glow of gas lamps trembles in the fog, like stars struggling to survive. But what strikes you most is how normal it all seems. Drugs aren't confined to back alleys, they're everywhere. Pharmacies advertise their cures, women carry bottles in handbags, children are dosed before bed. Addiction isn't a shameful secret, it's a household habit. The city is built on iron and steam, but also on laudanum and morphine, the silent scaffolding of survival. You catch yourself thinking that maybe, just maybe, you'd have taken the pipe too. After all, how else do you survive a world that never stops pressing down? If you think the den was unsettling, wait until you see what polite society hides in its medicine cabinets. You don't have to wander far before the contrast hits you. Just a few streets from the den, past the ragged children selling matches, and the pubs vomiting drunks into the gutter. You stumble into a neighborhood that smells less like despair and more like freshly scrubbed stone. Gas lamps here burn steadier, the fog thinner, the cobbles swept clean by servants who never get their names in the papers. The houses are tall, proud, symmetrical, the kind of buildings that announce someone respectable lives here, and they'd prefer you not to look too closely at the drains. You hesitate before the steps of one such house, half expecting to be chased away by a butler with a broom. But no one stops you, so up you go, your boots clacking against the polished stone. The front door swings open with a faint creak that suggests you're not the first uninvited guest to slip through. Inside, it smells of beeswax polish, coal fire, and faintly, very faintly, alcohol and opium. A drawing room, and a familiar little brown bottle sitting innocent as a teacup on the side table. You'd think laudanum would look sinister. After all, it's opium dissolved in alcohol, the stuff that could drop an elephant if you poured enough. But no. In Victorian London it's packaged like perfume, elegant glass, labels with fine print and decorative flourishes, corks sealed with wax. It's the kind of bottle you'd expect to find on your grandmother's vanity, not beside her Bible. A lady in her 30s sits in an armchair by the fire, her corset laced a little too tightly, her expression drawn a little too thin. She lifts the laudanum bottle to her lips, as casually as if it were a glass of sherry. A few drops on her tongue, swallowed with the ease of habit. She exhales, shoulders softening, eyes drifting. The firelight flickers across her face, catching the tiny tremor of relief. You realize you're not watching a scandal. You're watching daily life. Her husband might be upstairs, reading the Times. Her children might be in the nursery, sleeping off their own dose of soothing syrup. And here she is, sipping poison by the fire as though it were an evening treat. She isn't a villain. She isn't a degenerate. She's just another Londoner quietly numbing the sharp edges of existence. And here's the thing, no one would bat an eyelid. Laudanum was as common as tea, sold over the counter in chemist shops, advertised in newspapers. Doctors prescribed it for coughs, headaches, menstrual pain, insomnia, nervous complaints, which was basically shorthand for being alive in the 19th century. If you had a problem, there was a tincture for that. It's almost funny when you think about it. You live in an age where wellness influencers hawk detox teas that make you sprint to the bathroom. Yet you're probably sitting there smug about how you'd never fall for Victorian snake oil. Be honest. If your doctor handed you a beautifully bottled cure, all that took away pain and promised sweet sleep, wouldn't you try a drop or two? Don't lie to me. The woman in the chair sighs again, tipping her head back as the laudanum seeps into her veins. You wonder if she knows she's hooked. Does she feel the creeping need yet? Or has she convinced herself it's just medicine, nothing more? Addiction in Victorian London didn't come with rehab clinics or 12-step programs. It came with polite nods, quiet funerals, and euphemisms in the obituary section. From the street outside, a carriage rattles past, its wheels crunching on damp stone. You step back into the night, leaving the woman to her fire and her bottle. The contrast between the den and the drawing room lingers in your mind. Poor or wealthy, desperate or respectable. It's the same story, opium everywhere, addiction everywhere, each class just wrapping it in a different bow. You wander further, your boots splashing in shallow puddles. At the corner, a pharmacy glows warm under the gaslight. The window displays neat rows of bottles, powders, pills, an apothecary's promise of salvation. You step inside, greeted by the crisp smell of camphor, chalk, and alcohol. Behind the counter, a man in a spotless coat arranges jars like a priest tending his altar. He greets you with a polite nod, asks what ails you. His voice is calm, practiced, almost soothing. You could say anything: headache, stomach cramps, sleeplessness, and he'd have a tincture for it. Laudanum, morphine drops. Maybe even a tonic laced with cocaine if he thinks you look adventurous. And here's the brilliant part: nobody thinks of this as vice. In fact, opium was seen as a mark of modern medicine, proof that science was conquering suffering. The Victorians were proud of their chemistry, proud of their progress. If a few thousand people got quietly addicted along the way, well, that was just the cost of living in an enlightened age. You glance at the labels: Godfrey's cordial for fussy babies, Dalby's carminative for upset stomachs, Mother Bailey's quieting syrup. All sweetened, all laced with opium. Imagine lining these bottles up on your nursery shelf, right next to the rocking horse. The irony is almost too sharp. Babies drugged into silence so their parents could sleep. Some never waking up again. Child mortality rates were high enough already. Opium just gave fate a helping hand. The pharmacist notices your lingering gaze and smiles. Very popular remedies, he says as if reading from a script. Safe in small doses. Safe. The word hangs in the air like an unfunny joke. You nod politely and slip back into the street before he can ask what you're shopping for. The fog curls thicker now, clinging to your coat. You walk faster, drawn by the sound of voices up ahead. A tavern spills laughter and music into the night, but just beyond it, quieter, a cluster of figures huddle in an alley. Men and women, their bodies half, hidden in shadow, passing a bottle hand to hand. They sip greedily, clutching it as though it's the last warmth in the world. Laudanum again, cheap and common, poured into whatever container they could scrounge. These aren't poets or middle-class housewives. These are the forgotten. The ones without parlors or pharmacies. The ones who buy their dreams by the drop from a dealer with no conscience. One of them catches your eye. His face is gaunt, his cheeks sunken, his lips cracked. But when he drinks, there's a flicker of peace, a momentary mask of relief. You realize it's the same expression you saw on the woman by the fire. Same drug, different setting. Respectability stripped away. All that remains is the need. It's strange, isn't it? How the same substance can look elegant in a drawing room and pitiful in a gutter. It makes you wonder how much of morality is just packaging. You turn away before the stares become too heavy, before the questions in their eyes demand answers you can't give. You walk, and the city breathes around you, carriages clattering, gas lamps hissing. The ever-present coal smoke pressing in. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben tolls the hour. Time keeps marching forward, though here it feels stuck, suspended in a haze of opium smoke and laudanum dreams. You realize the Victorians weren't just experimenting with drugs. They were living in a society built on them. Factories demanded endless labor. Children cried in crowded tenements. Women endured childbirth without anesthesia. Pain was constant, and so was the search for escape. And escape was cheap. You pass another pharmacy, another tavern, another alley. The bottles blur together in your mind: laudanum, morphine, chlorodyne, heroin, cough syrup. All legal, all available, all quietly claiming their victims. It's easy to think of Victorian London as a city of progress. Railways, industry empire. But walking here, you see the shadow empire, 2-1, built on chemicals. On addictions that few acknowledged but everyone lived with. The fog thickens again, swallowing your footsteps, muting the city's noise. For a moment, you feel as though you're drifting between worlds, not quite in one time or the other. And maybe that's fitting, because the Victorians themselves often seemed caught between progress and ruin, between respectability and decay. Their drugs were both salvation and damnation, their bottles both medicine and poison. A faint glow up ahead draws you on. Another door, another sanctuary. But this one isn't for the poor or the desperate. This is where the writers go, the thinkers, the dreamers. Where poets chase visions and novelists wrestle with inspiration. You hear the murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, and somewhere, faintly, the sound of laughter touched with hysteria. You realize you've only skimmed the surface. The dens were one thing, the households another. But behind the curtain of respectability lies an even stranger world: the intellectuals, the artists. The famous names who drank their laudanum and smoked their pipes while shaping the literature you probably studied in school. And if you thought the streets reeked of desperation, wait until you see the dreams these writers brought back from the abyss. You push the door open, and the sound hits you first. Not music, not conversation exactly, but the scratch of pen nibs against paper, the low hum of thought, the occasional stifled cough. The air is thick with tobacco smoke, candle soot, and something sweeter beneath, the faint perfume of laudanum. This isn't a tavern or a den. It's a study, a sanctuary, a writer's lair. And you've just stepped into the bloodstream of Victorian imagination. You're not the only one here. Men sit hunched over desks, their faces pale in lamplight, eyes shadowed from long nights of scribbling. Bottles glint by their inkwells, half drained but not abandoned. Some work feverishly, words pouring onto paper as though chased by unseen demons. Others recline, staring at the ceiling with glassy eyes, waiting for visions to descend like angels, or nightmares. And you realize with a jolt these are names you know. The ones you thought were just lines on a syllabus, carved into the monuments of literature. Here they are, alive, restless, chasing inspiration through the fog of opium. You notice Samuel Taylor Coleridge first. He sits in a chair that looks too small for him, his body hunched forward as if apologizing for its own weight. His hair is wild, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. Yet there's a spark in them that refuses to die. Before him, sheets of paper lie scattered, some ink blotted, others filled with dense lines of verse. Beside the ink bottle, a smaller one gleams amber in the lamplight. Laudanum, of course. You know the story? Or you thought you did. Coleridge, the poet who dreamed Kubla Khan, under the spell of opium, only to have it shattered by a knock at the door. But seeing him here, the myth feels different. This isn't a man dabbling in visions for fun. This is a man in pain, a man shackled by illness, by despair, by the relentless weight of his own thoughts. The laudanum isn't a key to paradise, it's a chain with velvet cuffs. He lifts the bottle, swallows a measured dose, then sets it down with trembling hands. His lips move silently, shaping lines only half formed. You catch fragments. A stately pleasure, Doma. Caverns measureless to man. His voice is ragged. The words spilling as though pulled from somewhere deep and dark. For a moment, you glimpse the beauty in it, the wildness, the desperate reach for the sublime. Then his hand falters, his gaze clouds, and the thread slips away. He sags against the chair, defeated by his own miracle. You want to reach out, to tell him his words will echo for centuries, that students will scrawl them into notebooks and pretend to understand. But you can't. You're only a traveler, watching him vanish beneath the tide. A cough draws your attention across the room. Another figure, smaller, sharper, his eyes bright and restless. Thomas de Quincey, the essayist who turned addiction into literature. He sits with his pen poised like a surgeon's scalpel, dissecting his own soul for the page. The laudanum bottle beside him is nearly empty, and you know it's not the first of the day. He writes not with fever but with precision, as though cataloguing each hallucination, each agony, each ecstasy for posterity. You glance over his shoulder, and the words swim into focus. Confessions of an English opium eater. He writes about himself, but not really. He writes about London, about the vast city that swallowed him whole, about the streets that wound like veins through his memory. He writes of pain, of relief, of the monstrous dreams that stalked his nights. He writes so that others might glimpse the abyss without falling in. And yet, he is falling. You can see it in the twitch of his fingers, the pallor of his skin, the tremor in his jaw. He writes to master the drug, but the drug has already mastered him. Every sentence is a duel he cannot win. You step back, uneasy, and nearly bump into another man by the window. He is lean, restless, his eyes sharp beneath unruly brows. Charles Dickens. The great novelist himself, though not quite as you imagined. He paces, muttering to himself, a small vial of opium tincture flicking between his fingers. He doesn't swig it like the others. He dabs, he doses carefully, like a man who knows the balance between stimulation and stupor. And here's the thing, Dickens wasn't known as an addict. He wasn't a slave to the bottle in the same way. But he knew it. He used it. He wove it into his stories. You recall the character of Mrs. Gamp, the gin and laudanum, soaked nurse, grotesque yet familiar. Dickens understood what the drug did to the city, to its people. He held up the mirror, and London saw its own red, rimmed eyes staring back. He catches your gaze for a moment, his face tight with something like suspicion. As if he knows you don't belong here. You look away quickly, pretending to study the shelves lined with books, their spines cracked from use, their margins scrawled with notes. The room hums with quiet intensity. These men, these giants, are bound by ink and opium alike. They write to escape, to endure, to translate their torment into something immortal. And yet you can't shake the thought. How many of their masterpieces are tangled with the drug? How many visions would have burned out if not for the bottle? And how many might have burned brighter without it? You drift to the edge of the room, where a few lesser-known figures huddle, their names destined for footnotes rather than monuments. Painters, essayists, minor poets. They drink their laudanum with the same mixture of reverence and resignation. Some chase inspiration, others chase oblivion. All are caught in the same web, and it strikes you this isn't just personal, it's cultural. Victorian creativity itself is steeped in opium. The literature, the art, the very imagination of the age, twisted, expanded, blurred by the haze of the drug. The Victorians built railways and empires, yes, but they also built dreamscapes, fueled by bottles sold at every corner chemist. You wonder what this means for you. sitting centuries later with their books on your shelf. Were you reading Coleridge? Or were you reading his Laudanum? Were you walking through Dickens's London? Or through the fog that rolled from his vial? The line blurs until you can't tell where the writer ends and the drug begins. The thought unsettles you, and you step outside for air. The night greets you with a slap of fog and coal smoke. The city stretches before you, alive with carriages and footsteps, laughter and weeping. Somewhere, a baby cries. Somewhere else, a church bell tolls. London breathes restless and unquiet, and you realize you've only seen a fraction of it. The dens, the drawing rooms, the writer's studies, they're all part of the same body, the same bloodstream, the same pulse. Opium flows through it all, invisible yet inescapable. You walk, your boots echoing against damp stone, and the city swallows you whole. The scriptorium breathes behind you, its candles guttering, its pens scratching, its bottles glinting. Inside, the writers continue their vigil, fighting and surrendering by turns. Outside, the city dreams its laudanum dreams. And you, time traveler, are left to wonder when you wake tomorrow. Will you remember the words, or only the fog that birthed them? The smell hits you before the sound. Sharp, metallic. Sour with disinfectant that's not quite disinfectant. More like vinegar attempting to disguise the reek of blood. Beneath it all lingers something sweeter. Floral almost, faintly medicinal opium. You're in a Victorian doctor's surgery, though you might as well call it a theatre. Because what's about to unfold feels more like performance than science. A wooden counter stretches before you, lined with bottles of every shape and size. Their glass glowing amber, green and clear, labels scrawled in ornate handwriting read like spells laudanum. Morphia, chloral hydrate, paregoric elixir. And next to them, more innocuous remedies. Camphor, peppermint, bicarbonate of soda, tokens of respectability among the real stars of the show. The doctor enters, coat stained at the cuffs, spectacles slipping down his nose. He looks more like a distracted schoolteacher than a healer, but in his pocket rattles a key to an entire universe of relief and ruin. He greets you with brisk cheer, though you suspect he hasn't washed his hands since breakfast. Hygiene is still more theory than practice here, after all. Germs are whispers, not gospel. On the table lies his patient, a woman clutching her abdomen with a pale, clammy face. Childbirth complications, perhaps. Or female troubles, a phrase so broad it might mean anything from cramps to a ruptured womb. The doctor doesn't probe too deeply. He reaches instead for his bottle of laudanum, measuring out a hearty spoonful. No thermometer, no blood test, no X-ray, just the universal prescription. "This will ease you, madam," he murmurs, tipping the amber liquid between her lips. She swallows, grimacing at the bitterness. And ease her it will, at least for a while. Pain recedes like a tide, fear dissolves, muscles unclench, eyes flutter shut. To her, the doctor is a miracle worker. To you, time traveler. It's clear he's more bartender than physician, dosing his patients with the same draught, whether their complaint is a cough, a broken arm, or a broken heart. It's disturbingly effective, though. Imagine if your modern doctor handed you a cocktail of whiskey, Xanax, and morphine for a sore throat. You'd walk out convinced you'd been cured, until your lungs collapsed 3 days later. The doctor's practice is brisk. A child with a hacking cough arrives next. The father looks worried, the child's ribs hiving with every rasping breath. Consumption lurks everywhere in these streets, devouring the weak. But the doctor doesn't diagnose tuberculosis. He simply pours a teaspoon of infant cordial, laudanum diluted with syrup, and presses it into the child's mouth. The boy quiets instantly, lulled into the drugged calm that parents mistake for healing. The father leaves relieved, the doctor satisfied, the boy drifting into a haze he can't name. If you're unsettled, you should be. Victorian medicine was less about curing and more about quieting. Pain silenced was victory, even if the disease roared on. It's a bit like covering your smoke alarm with a sock. You still burn, you just don't hear the scream. You slip deeper into the surgery, watching the doctor prepare for something grander. A surgery in the literal sense. The patient is a laborer, leg mangled by machinery. He groans on the table as assistants hold him down. In earlier years, this would have meant biting a leather strap and screaming into unconsciousness. But now, thanks to a Scottish innovation, the doctor uncorks a small bottle of chloroform. The pungent fumes waft as he douses a rag and presses it over the man's face. The laborer thrashes, then slackens, sliding into the velvet abyss. Silence fills the room. The doctor looks proud, almost smug. Marvelous invention, he mutters. And in a way it is. No more howls echoing through hospital wards. No more blood-curdling amputations performed to the rhythm of agony. Chloroform is progress. But it's also a gamble. Too little, the patient feels every slice. Too much, the patient never wakes. You watch the doctor saw into the leg, blood spilling, assistants dabbing frantically with cloth. Miraculously, the man survives. Today. You lean back, queasy. It's not the gore that gets you. It's the casual confidence, the willingness to wield these drugs like blunt instruments of mercy. Laudanum for everyone. Chloroform when needed, morphine for soldiers, and a prayer for the rest. Stepping into the dispensary next door, you find a pharmacist's domain. Rows of jars and drawers, pestles and mortars, measuring spoons. The chemist bustles about, his hands stained with powders and tinctures. He knows as much as the doctor, maybe more. Mothers come begging for Godfrey's cordial to soothe their babies. Never mind that it's mostly opium. Gentlemen request morphine injections for gout. Ladies ask for tonics to brighten their nerves, unaware they're sipping chloral hydrate, 1 foot from chemical sleep. And here lies the strangest truth: Victorians trusted their chemists implicitly. No regulation, no prescription required. A few coins, a polite request, and you walked away with enough narcotic to stupefy a horse. The shelves glitter with bottles, and you can't help but think of your own century's pharmacies, sterile and fluorescent, everything locked behind counters. Here, the pharmacy is more like a candy shop, except the sweets can kill you. The pharmacist smiles as he packs powders into paper sachets, the corners folded with care. He could be selling biscuits, not narcotics. And in a way it's not malicious. He believes in these remedies. They work, after all, at least in the immediate sense. Pain ebbs, coughs quiet, insomnia yields to blissful slumber. The side effects, the dependency, the deaths. But knowledge lurks further down the line, in journals yet unwritten. You drift back into the waiting room, where patients sit in wooden chairs, clutching bottles and packets. Their faces a mixture of hope and resignation. A man with a miner's cough wheezes softly, his laudanum bottle clutched like a talisman. A young mother rocks her drugged infant, cooing as the baby sleeps unnaturally still. An elderly woman with arthritis sips her morphine cordial, smiling faintly as pain loosens its grip. The room feels oddly holy, like a chapel of chemical grace. Each bottle a sacrament, each dose a prayer. You can almost hear the unspoken liturgy: take, drink, and forget. And yet beneath it all lies a quiet horror. The city is dosing itself into oblivion, one spoonful at a time. Doctors prescribe it, pharmacists sell it, patients demand it. The whole system hums like a machine greased with opium. You wonder if anyone sees the danger, or if the haze is too thick. You step outside into the London air again, though it's scarcely cleaner. Coal smoke mingles with damp fog, the night streets alive with footsteps and carriage wheels. Somewhere nearby, another surgery door creaks shut. Another patient cradles their bottle. Another doctor wipes his bloody hands. And as you walk, you can't shake the thought. If you think the doctors are reckless now, just wait until you see what happens when the Victorians start experimenting on themselves in the name of science. The fog clings heavier tonight. And it's not just the coal smoke this time. You follow a narrow lane off Commercial Road, boots crunching against damp cobblestones, the gas lamps above throwing more shadow than light. A woman with tired eyes and a bright smile leans against a post, her shawl slipping from one shoulder. She whispers an invitation. Cheap, wary practiced, but when you decline she shrugs, muttering something about better prospects. Inside the den. That's what you've come for anyway. The infamous opium den, whispered about in penny newspapers, dramatized in serialized novels, and raided every so often by constables who look the other way for the right price. A battered door creaks open, and you duck your head beneath its warped frame. The room swallows you in heat and scent. It's thick, pungent, unmistakable, the cloying sweetness of smoked opium. Your eyes water, adjusting to the dim orange glow of oil lamps, their light gilding the haze into a golden mist. The air is syrupy, sticky in your lungs. Every breath feels half stolen. The place hums low, not with chatter but with sighs, murmurs, The occasional half-slurred laugh. Bodies recline on wooden platforms and mattresses, limbs loose, faces glazed. Long pipes pass from hand to hand, their bowls glowing ember red. The smoke curls upward, coiling like serpents toward the rafters. You move among them, and the scene is uncanny. Respectable clerks, sailors, poets, even a magistrate. Men you passed in daylight as models of propriety, now sprawled in languor, eyes lidded, their waistcoats undone. A woman in satin lies barefoot, pipe resting against her lips as though it's a lover's kiss. An artist mutters about visions of dragons, slithering through the haze, scratching sketches onto the margins of an old newspaper. It strikes you how ordinary it looks. No frenzied chaos, no violent mania. Just people quietly undoing themselves hour by hour. Opium doesn't demand theatrics, it cradles, it lulls. It whispers, stay. Don't rise. Tomorrow can wait. The den keeper, a wiry man with sharp features, moves through the room with the precision of a priest conducting ritual. He replenishes lamps, taps ashes from pipes, takes coins with a nod. His business runs smoother than most Victorian surgeries you've seen, and in some ways safer. No chloroform overdoses here, no hasty amputations. Just bliss and the slow unraveling that follows. At the far end, behind a faded velvet curtain, a private room waits. You peek in and see luxury cushions piled high, imported silks, carved screens. Here the city's elite come to indulge away from the public eye. A gentleman in a top hat, still on his head though his cravat dangles loose, lies motionless except for the faint rise and fall of his chest. His companion, a young woman, exhales a perfect plume of smoke that coils above him like a ghost. You wonder if he's sleeping or simply gone too far. She doesn't seem to care. The irony isn't lost on you. These dens are demonized in newspapers as Oriental contagions, blamed on Chinese immigrants, painted as exotic corrupters of English virtue. Yet most of the people stretched before you are English themselves. Addiction isn't imported. It's homegrown, nurtured by the very society that buys laudanum from pharmacies and morphine from doctors. The den is just an extension of the bottle on the bedside table. Still, the foreign image sells. The public loves a scapegoat, and opium smoke has the perfect villainous haze. Degeneracy of the East. They call it ignoring the laudanum, laced babies rocking in English cradles. You sink onto a cushion yourself, pipe offered by a kind-eyed stranger. The wood is smooth, warm where others' lips have touched it. You hesitate, then draw the smoke flooding your lungs. It burns, yet sweet, coating your throat with cloying thickness. Your head sways, your limbs slacken. The lamplight softens, blurs, hallows into strange colors. A strange quiet comes over you, not silence, but muffled sound, like cotton in your ears. The world narrows to golden haze. And then the images. Not hallucinations, not quite, but strange distortions of thought. The man beside you seems impossibly tall, as if stretching toward the rafters. The floor shifts like a slow tide. You close your eyes and drift, yet remain awake. Caught in a space between. Time loses its teeth. Minutes or hours. Hard to tell. When you rouse, the den feels changed. New faces have arrived, old ones have gone. Or perhaps not. Perhaps they've only shifted deeper into their stupor. Outside, you realize hours must have passed. London may already be waking. You pull yourself upright, steadier than expected, but wrapped in a faint dizziness, the taste of resin thick on your tongue. The den keeper watches you with a faint smirk, as if to say, yes, you'll be back. And maybe you would. The haze leaves a peculiar absence, a yearning for the softness it brought. That's the trick of it. Opium doesn't shout, it whispers. You step out into the damp dawn. The fog feels thinner now, but your body feels heavier, your mind lagging. You glance behind you at the cracked door, already closing on the sighs within. Somewhere behind it, someone won't walk out at all. But the underground isn't just opium. Follow the Thames west, into the glittering districts. And another drug seduces London society, chloral ether, laughing gas. The parties of the wealthy, where scientific amusements mask chemical indulgence. A ballroom where young men inhale nitrous oxide until their laughter pitches into mania. A drawing room where debutantes sip chloral-laced wine, their giggles slowing into glassy stares. It looks elegant, refined, because everything looks refined when draped in lace and velvet. But beneath it is the same craving, the same downward tug. This dual world fascinates you. On one street, Sailors and laborers collapse on mattresses in smoke-choked rooms. On another, ladies faint into velvet couches, their physicians prescribing sleeping draughts, indistinguishable from poison. The social gap is vast, but the tether of dependence is the same. And you can't help but think the Victorians pretended they were shocked by vice, terrified of moral decay. And yet they indulged it in every corner, from cradle to coffin. Hypocrisy wasn't an accident, it was tradition. Much like today, really. Think of how energy drinks are scandalized as dangerous for teens, while espresso martinis flow like water at every bar. Same outrage, same indulgence. Different packaging. The sun climbs now, faint through the smog, the city yawning awake. You walk, heavy-footed, past carriages clattering over stones, milkmen calling out, servants rushing to market. They're sober for now. But hidden in cupboards, tucked in purses, stacked on apothecary shelves, the bottles wait. And if you think the dens and drawing rooms are unsettling, wait until you step into the laboratories, where men in white coats begin experimenting, not just with patients, but with themselves. The first thing you notice is the smell. It's not the thick sweetness of opium smoke, nor the bitter tang of laudanum. This is sharper, chemical, almost metallic. You've wandered off the streets of London and into the polished corridors of a medical college, where young men in black coats rush between rooms, clutching glass vials that look more like toys than tools. You follow the murmur of voices into a lecture hall. The benches slope downward toward a wooden table, and on it sits a peculiar array, jars filled with powders, little brass canisters, and most curiously, a long bag of rubber tubing fitted with a nozzle. A man with wild hair and even wilder eyes, Professor Edmund Sharp, according to the chalkboard, beams at his students. He looks less like a physician and more like a conjurer about to reveal a trick. Gentlemen, he declares, striking the table for emphasis, you are about to witness the future of medicine, and perhaps of society itself. The students lean forward eagerly, quills scratching, eyes bright. And with that, Sharp seizes the nozzle and takes a long, deliberate inhalation from the bag. His cheeks hollow, the sound of rushing gas fills the room, and then he erupts into a fit of helpless laughter. Not a dignified chuckle, not a polite wheeze. This is full-bodied, howling hilarity, his whole body shaking. He stumbles against the table, tears streaming down his cheeks. The students roar with laughter too, not at the joke, there isn't one, but at the absurdity of their professor giggling like a child. They scramble down to try it for themselves, and soon the room is a chorus of shrieks, hiccups, and squeals, the lot of them staggering like drunkards at a fairground. One student collapses dramatically onto the floor, rolling about until his wig slips askew. Another leans so far back on the bench that he topples clean over, giggling all the way. You, of course, know what's happening. Nitrous oxide. Laughing gas. Humphrey Davy had made it famous earlier in the century, and though it began as a curiosity of chemistry, it found new life as a party trick, a social amusement, and eventually a medical anesthetic. But here in this lecture hall, you can't shake the impression that the line between medicine and mayhem has all but vanished. Sharp finally steadies himself, gasping between residual chuckles. Gentlemen, he wheezes, imagine the power of a substance that can banish pain, silence fear, and produce joy! Why? We could transform surgery itself? No more screams, no more thrashing! His students applaud wildly, though whether for science or spectacle is impossible to tell. And then, with theatrical gravity, he adds, of course, it does carry a small risk of asphyxiation. But science demands courage! That line hits a little too close. You glance at the toppled student still rolling on the floor, face flushed crimson, gas nozzle clutched like a lover. Courage indeed. If the streets outside are filled with the slow drift of opium, the laboratories here are a carnival of chemicals, either chloroform, morphine, cocaine, each new discovery ushered in with both celebration and reckless abandon. The Victorians were pioneers, yes, but pioneers who tested their maps by walking into quicksand. Take Dr. James Simpson of Edinburgh, for example. A serious man of serious reputation, respected in obstetrics. But one evening in 1847, he invites two colleagues to dinner and, instead of serving wine, sets before them a crystal decanter filled with chloroform. Gentlemen, he proclaims, let us investigate. They inhale deeply, laughing at first, but soon the room spins. They collapse one by one onto the floor, not cold, sprawled like corpses in their frock coats. Hours later, they awaken groggy, their faces pale, their heads throbbing. Simpson, thrilled, declares chloroform the discovery of the age. Never mind that any one of them could have suffocated. Science is progress after all, and progress rarely checks for a pulse. The story spreads quickly, and soon chloroform becomes fashionable. Yes, fashionable. It wasn't confined to surgical theatres. Aristocratic ladies demanded it in childbirth, lauding its ability to dull the agony. Even Queen Victoria herself accepted chloroform during the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853, giving the practice royal approval. Society swooned. What had been an obscure chemical now had a crown-stamped seal of approval. But here's the darker truth: chloroform was unpredictable. Too little, and it merely dulled the senses. Too much, and it stopped the heart outright. Doctors had no standardized dosages, no precise instruments. They dripped liquid onto cloths, waved them under noses, and prayed for the best. Many a patient never woke. And yet, even as bodies piled, physicians continued experimenting, on themselves as much as on patients. It was both a professional curiosity and a guilty pleasure. Imagine being a Victorian doctor. Long hours, little sleep, perpetual stress. Wouldn't you be tempted to steal a whiff from the chloroform jar, just to escape for a moment? You pass into another chamber of the college, this one smaller, more intimate. Two young chemists huddle over a table, passing a small vial between them. Cocaine, one whispers reverently. They dab crystals onto their gums, eyes widening at the numbing rush. A marvel, he murmurs, a gift from nature herself. This, you realize, is the newest darling of Victorian science. Cocaine, isolated from coca leaves in the 1850s, hailed as a wonder drug. Surgeons praised its ability to numb tissue without chloroform's suffocation risk. Writers praised its stimulation of creativity. And merchants praised its profitability, blending it into tonics, wines, and even lozenges for colds. The young chemists snicker as the second leans in too close, pupils wide, voice rushing. "I feel invincible," he exclaims, his words tumbling. He grabs your sleeve with sudden intensity. Do you feel it too? The future. His grip is iron. His excitement manic. You nod because honestly, it's easier than disagreeing. It's the same pattern, again and again. Discovery euphoria misuse. What began in the lab leaks into the street. What starts as science becomes indulgence. Nitrous oxide, chloroform, either cocaine. They slip from lectures into parlors, into dens, into pockets. And you can't help but compare it to today. Replace the Victorian chloroform jar with a modern energy drink, or a prescription pill bottle. Replace the scientific experiment with a college party. Different chemicals, same recklessness, same insistence that this one is safe, harmless, revolutionary. Human nature doesn't change, only the labels do. But as you watch Sharp refill his gas bag, as you watch the young chemists argue over which compound might bring fame, a darker thought surfaces: these men aren't just risking themselves. They're laying foundations for decades of dependence, for industries of addiction. They believe they're conquering pain, but they're just reshaping it, redirecting it, multiplying it. The lecture hall empties eventually, students stumbling out, still giggling from their experiments. The corridors fall quiet, the air heavy with chemical ghosts. You step outside, the night air sharp and clean by comparison. London looms before you, gas lamps flickering in the fog. Somewhere in a drawing room, an aristocrat is dosing herself with chloroform. Somewhere in a surgery, a patient's heart has just stopped. Somewhere in a pharmacy, a child is being handed a tonic laced with cocaine. And in the laboratories, the experiments continue. Always more to test. Always more to taste. Always more to risk. The city exhales its chemical breath into the night, and you walk with it, wondering how many more discoveries await. If you think this parade of professors toppling themselves for science is absurd, wait until you walk through the prisons and asylums, where drugs weren't playful experiments, but instruments of control. The clank of iron locks rattles down your spine, before you even see the bars. You've left the gas-lit streets behind, and entered a building where the air itself feels heavy, thick with damp stone and disinfectant. It is not the chaos of a laughing gas lecture hall, nor the smoky haze of an opium den. Here silence is cultivated like a crop, enforced, pressed into every wall. You are in a Victorian prison. The first thing you notice is how still it is. Hundreds of men inhabit these cells, yet the corridors echo like cathedrals. They are not permitted to speak. They shuffle in silence, eat in silence, labor in silence. And when silence falters, when madness gnaws at the edges, there is a remedy. The apothecary arrives with his wooden tray, bottles clinking faintly. No one looks at him directly. He is the quiet angel of the prison, the man who soothes raving tempers with draughts that promise peace. You glance at the labels. Laudanum, chloral hydrate, morphine. This is not medicine in the modern sense. These are shackles poured into cups. You are ushered into the infirmary, where the rules of the prison bend just slightly. Here, men moan openly, fevered, broken by punishment or despair. A gaunt prisoner clutches his stomach, rocking, whispering half-formed words. The doctor doesn't probe deeply. Instead, he pours a spoonful of laudanum and presses it between cracked lips. The prisoner swallows obediently. His rocking slows. His eyelids flutter, then droop. Silence restored. You realize the drug is less about healing than management. Cheaper than care, quicker than kindness. An entire system built on efficiency of suffering. And it is not only men behind bars. Women's prisons, too, found their silence through chemistry. A matron recalls in her journal how laudanum was the most agreeable assistant for quelling disturbances. Women racked by grief or rage or simple defiance were handed draughts that dissolved their edges. What was once rebellion became drowsiness. What was once despair became stupor. You might think of these prisoners as addicts, but addiction was not the word Victorians used. They spoke instead of quieting medicines, soothing powders, restoratives, euphemisms as thick as the syrup itself. Dependence grew unnoticed, or rather, ignored. After all, what did it matter if a prisoner or pauper became attached to their draught, so long as they remained manageable? From the prison, your steps carry you into another institution, the asylum. If the prison was built for punishment, the asylum was built for reform. Or so its architects claimed. Long corridors, wide windows, painted walls in pastel shades. That moral treatment of madness, Victorians said, demanded calm surroundings. But when calm failed to emerge naturally, there was always the apothecary's cabinet. Here the air is punctuated by cries, mutters, sudden laughter. Patients wander in thin gowns, some humming tunelessly, others curled in corners. Attendants hover, watchful, anxious. At the first sign of agitation, out comes the draught. Laudanum again, but also chloral hydrate. The so-called knockout drops. A sip, and the patient slumps. You watch as a young woman, her hair wild, shrieks that the walls are closing in. Two attendants restrain her gently but firmly, tilt her head back, and pour a bitter liquid down her throat. She coughs, gags, then quiets. Within minutes her limbs loosen, her cries dissolve into sighs, and she is led away, pliant as cloth. The attendants exchange relieved glances. Order maintained. You ask yourself, is this care or cruelty? To the Victorians it was mercy. A chemical straitjacket. They might not have said aloud, but surely recognized. Better than the whips and chains of earlier centuries, they argued. Better to drug than to beat. And yet, as you stand in the hallway of this asylum, you sense how fine the line is between mercy and neglect. The asylum's ledgers confirm it. Doses repeated, escalated, stretched across weeks, months, years. Patients who entered with sharp tempers or restless despair are slowly dissolved into docility. Their identities blur. The asylum achieves its goal, not through cure, but through sedation. What strikes you most is the irony. In the lecture halls, chloroform and cocaine were hailed as symbols of progress, proof of humanity's advance into modernity. In the asylums, those same substances became tools of containment, shackles in liquid form. Science promised freedom from pain, but in practice, it forged new kinds of cages. You move through ward after ward, the pattern repeating. A man who once raged now stares blankly through barred windows. A woman who once wailed now lies slack in her cot, murmuring nonsense words to no one. They are quiet, yes, but their silence is not peace, it is chemical, manufactured. Step back outside into the city air, and you feel the contrast. On one street, children sip coca, wine sold as restorative. On another, housewives praise laudanum for easing woman's troubles. In parlors and dens, men puff opium for pleasure. And behind thick walls in prisons and asylums, the same substances enforce order. You understand now that drugs were not merely medicine or recreation in the Victorian world. They were instruments of society, woven into its machinery of control. A guard with a key could command obedience, but so too could a doctor with a spoon. And as you walk, you realize this truth echoes into the present. Modern prisons, modern hospitals. Sedatives still flow, still soothe, still silence. The language is cleaner, the dosage is more precise, but the principle remains. When society demands order, chemistry obliges. The city exhales around you. Somewhere a professor inhales nitrous oxide and collapses in giggles. Somewhere a mother hushes her child with a laudanum-laced syrup. Somewhere an asylum patient drifts into oblivion under chloral hydrate. Different places, different justifications, but always the same current, the pursuit of silence, of control, of the quiet ones. And as you return to the street, you wonder, whose silence, exactly, are we buying, and at what cost? The door creaks as you step off the foggy street and into a Victorian home. You expect warmth, a crackling fire, the scent of bread and damp wool drying by the hearth. And yes, those are here. But something else lingers too, sweeter and heavier than smoke. A perfume of syrups, tonics, cordials. This house has its own apothecary, though the family might never admit it. The parlor is cozy, its wallpaper patterned with florid vines that seem almost too eager to climb. On the mantel, beside the clock and family Bible, stand small glass bottles with elegant labels. Godfrey's cordial, Messrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, Vin Mariani. They sparkle like jewels in the lamplight, their contents amber, crimson, deep brown. To an untrained eye, they look harmless, even pretty. To you, they look like the true guardians of the household. In the nursery upstairs, the real work is being done. The baby is wailing, shrill enough to pierce the thin wooden door. The mother, weary-eyed and pale, lifts a bottle, measures a spoonful, and tilts it carefully between the infant's lips. The syrup coats the child's tongue. Within minutes, the cries falter, then soften into hiccuping sighs. Tiny fists unclench. The mother exhales in relief, leaning against the crib with her shoulders sagging. It seems almost miraculous, peace restored with just a spoonful. But you know the truth. This syrup is laced with morphine. The child is not soothed, it is subdued. Thousands of Victorian infants were fed such potions, their colicky cries dulled not by comfort but by narcotics. Death notices in the newspapers called it failure to thrive, but between the lines, everyone knew. You glance back at the mother. Her relief is palpable, even heartbreaking. She is not cruel, she is exhausted. In a world with no electricity, no ready formula, no convenience of a midnight pharmacy run, what else is she to do? The syrup promises sleep, promises sanity. And who, in this weary house, would argue with that promise? Downstairs, the father sits by the fire, sipping from a glass of deep red liquid. He swirls it as if it were fine wine, and in a sense, it is. Vin Mariani, Bordeaux laced with coca leaves. He drinks with gusto, praising its ability to lift fatigue, sharpen focus, spark creativity. Pope Leo Sitter endorsed this very drink, you recall, even gave the inventor a medal. The father takes another swallow, sighs with contentment, and launches into a lecture on productivity at his factory job. His eyes gleam with something brighter than mere alcohol. You find yourself chuckling. This was the Victorian version of an energy drink. No cans, no neon logos, but the same promisey stamina in a bottle. And yes, it worked, until it didn't. On the kitchen shelf, another bottle waits Laudanum, the family's most versatile companion. Headaches, a spoonful. Stomach cramps, a spoonful. Trouble sleeping, a spoonful. Grief that gnaws through the night. You guessed it, a spoonful. Everyone in the household, from the grandmother with aching joints to the teenage son nursing heartbreak, has leaned on this dark tincture at some point. It is the silent guest at every table. You run your fingers over the bottle's label, noticing how ordinary it looks. No warnings, no skull and crossbones. Just polite script and a promise of relief. You imagine the advertisements in the penny papers, glowing testimonials from grateful mothers. Elegant illustrations of smiling children. The irony makes you smile grimly. Today's commercials for painkillers or sleep aids are slicker, but the song remains the same: trust us, swallow this, feel better. The evening wears on, and you follow the family through their rituals. Supper is eaten under the glow of a gas lamp. The father takes another draught of coca wine, gesturing grandly as he tells a story. The mother, yawning, sips from her own cup laced with a calming cordial. Even the children receive a dose of soothing syrup. Before bed, tucked under heavy quilts in a room that smells faintly of cloves, sugar, and something darker. It is strangely peaceful. And yet, you can't shake the unease. You see how easily dependence forms here, not in dens of vice, but in the very heart of domestic life. There are no opium pipes, no seedy alleyways. Just spoonfuls at the dinner table, sips by the fire, drops in the nursery. The family doesn't think of themselves as drug users. They are respectable, God-fearing Victorians. Yet the line between comfort and captivity blurs with each swallow. The evidence lies in the family ledger, tucked neatly on a desk in the corner. Skim the entries: 1 bottle cordial 3 shillings. 6 ounces laudanum 1 shilling. 2 bottles Vin Mariani 7 shillings. Regular purchases, as constant as coal or bread. The household runs not just on fuel and flour, but on chemistry. Step outside again, and you realize this is not unique to this family. Across London, across Britain, households are built on the same foundation. From the slums to the stately manors, bottles glimmer in cupboards, drawers, and bedside tables. Rich or poor, all depend on their potions. And you begin to understand this was not simply indulgence, nor merely ignorance. It was survival. Life in the Victorian world was harsh, and drugs offered soft edges against the grind. But those edges cut both ways. Behind the calm nights and steady nerves, the seeds of dependence were sown. Seeds that would sprout into crisis generations later. As you walk back into the fog, the gaslights flicker like tired stars. You've seen prisons, asylums, dens, and now parlors. Each place clings to the same quiet promise: relief in a bottle. But if you think the household was strange, wait until you see how the Victorians carried this chemistry into the streets themselves. Into markets, taverns, even medicine shows, where the line between carnival and pharmacy all but vanished. The moment you step back onto the cobblestones, the fog greets you like an old accomplice. It coils around your ankles and curls against the glow of the gas lamps, blurring the world into shadows and sparks. But the streets are anything but quiet. London is humming. You hear the clatter of horse hooves, the hiss of steam from a passing omnibus, the hawking cries of vendors. And above it all, the sing-song pitch of someone trying to sell you a miracle. You drift toward the sound, weaving past clusters of people. There, at the edge of a busy square, stands a wooden cart painted in bold letters. Dr. Bateman's pectoral drops. Guaranteed relief! The man on the cart is tall, mustachioed, his coat tails flapping dramatically as he gestures with one hand and waves a small bottle with the other. Ladies and gentlemen, he bellows, your cough, your fever, your sleepless nights, all gone with but a single drop of this wondrous tincture. His assistant, a thin boy with quick hands, darts through the crowd, offering samples on tiny spoons. The onlookers hesitate, sniff, then swallow. They make faces at the bitter taste, but within moments shoulders relax, eyes soften. A few even smile. You know why. The drops contain opium, of course. Not enough to knock them flat, just enough to soften the edges. Relief delivered with a flourish. The crowd begins to murmur approval. The seller grins, sensing coins ready to clink. A woman beside you nudges her friend, whispering that she bought a bottle last month for her husband's troubles. He hasn't complained since. She says it as if she has a secret, though half the square has heard. You watch as coins change hands, bottles disappear into aprons and coat pockets, and the cart rolls on to its next corner. You wander further. The streets are a maze of smells: fried fish, coal smoke, horse dung, wet wool. But threaded through them are sharper scents. Camphor, ether, spirits. Outside a chemist's shop, glass jars glitter in the lamplight. Some hold powders as fine as dust, others liquids that shimmer like jewels. Inside, the chemist himself stands in a stiff collar, measuring powders onto scales with a seriousness that borders on priestly. The customers wait in silence, respectful, as though receiving sacraments. But step just beyond the chemist's doorway, and you're back in carnival territory. Another barker waves a banner advertising Coca cordial. Strength for body and mind! He rhapsodizes about explorers in the Andes, chewing coca leaves for stamina, about great men of Europe drinking it for vigor. He slaps his chest dramatically. Even the Holy Father drinks it! The crowd gasps, impressed. You bite your tongue to keep from laughing, because yes, Pope Leo did indeed endorse coca wine. As the performance winds down, you notice a group of boys perched on a barrel, passing around a bottle of something that smells acrid and sharp. One boy takes a deep inhalation from a rag soaked in it, then bursts into giggles so violent he nearly falls. His friends howl with laughter, clamoring for their turn. Ether or chloroform, you realize, a cheap thrill. Dangerous, but irresistible to restless lads with pockets too shallow for wine. You shake your head, Victorian huffing. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Across the way, the tavern doors swing open, spilling laughter, song, and smoke into the night air. You step inside, letting the warmth envelop you. The smell is a heady stew, stale ale, sweat, pipe smoke, roast meat, and under it all, the sweet tang of laudanum. At the far end of the bar, a man pours it openly into his pent. He doesn't bother to hide it. No one bats an eye. To him, it's no different than adding bitters. The tavern is full of characters who look like they stepped from a novel. A group of sailors singing off, key, mugs raised. A pale clerk in a rumpled suit scribbling furiously in a notebook between gulps of gin. A woman in a bright red shawl telling fortunes at a corner table, her cards stained at the edges. And behind it all, the barkeep, who pours drinks with one hand and discreetly measures out sleeping draughts with the other. You get the sense that for every pint of ale served, another customer asks for something stronger. You slip outside again, back into the crisp night air. The city seems to never tire. In another square, you stumble upon a spectacle, a traveling medicine show. A stage has been erected, lit with lanterns that throw long, dancing shadows. At its center stands a man in a top hat, his voice carrying across the crowd. He is selling not just a potion, but a performance. Behind him, an assistant pretends to faint dramatically, only to be revived by a splash of tonic. Another coughs violently until a sip restores her to glowing health. The crowd oohs and ahs, some skeptical, many enchanted. Coins clink, bottles vanish into eager hands. It's half theatre, half pharmacy, and the people lap it up. In a city of smog and sickness, hope, even bottled hope, is worth a shilling or two. As you drift through the crowd, you feel the pulse of it all. Drugs are not hidden here, not shameful. They are woven into the rhythm of the street, as ordinary as bread or buttons. Vendors shout about them. Chemists measure them. Taverns stir them. Children dare each other with them. London itself hums on these substances, the way your own world hums on caffeine. Energy drinks and over-the-counter pills. Different bottles, same hunger. A gust of wind rattles the posters pasted to a wall. One catches your eye. Morphia for gentle sleep. Another chlorodyne, for coughs, cholara, and every complaint. The promises leap out, absurd and earnest all at once. You run your hand over the paper, feeling the rough paste beneath your fingertips. Thousands must have passed here before you, glancing at the same posters, tempted by the same promises. And then, from somewhere deep in the fog, a church bell tolls. Midnight, the crowds begin to thin. Vendors pack up their carts. Lanterns dim, the taverns quiet slightly, though never completely. You walk slowly, letting the sounds fade, the smells drift. The city exhales, just for a moment. But as you turn a corner, you see something different. A narrow alley darker than the rest. You step closer, peering in. A figure crouches there, huddled against the wall, clutching a bottle to his chest. His eyes are hollow, his movements twitchy. This is not the carnival side of the street pharmacy. This is the shadow it leaves behind. Dependence. Desperation. A life narrowed to the next dose. You back away, your footsteps soft on the stones. The city around you seems to sigh, as though it too knows the truth. Every bottle sold in the square, every tonic cheered by a crowd, every cordial swallowed in a tavern leaves echoes in the alleys. The gas lamps flicker as you turn back toward the main road. You've seen the home, the parlor, the street, the show. You've walked among crowds who laughed and cheered and swallowed without question. But the night still holds more secrets. If you think the street pharmacy was chaotic, wait until you see where science itself tried to take hold. Where laboratories and lectures promised not just comfort, but control. The street fades behind you, its barkers and bollards swallowed by the fog, until what remains is silence punctuated only by the slow drip of condensation from an iron gutter. Your boots crunch on gravel now, not cobblestone. Ahead looms a tall building, its windows glowing faintly gold against the darkness. It does not beckon like a tavern or dazzle like a medicine show. Instead, it waits with the patience of something that knows you will enter. You push the heavy door, and the scent greets you first, a sharp tang of chemicals, earthy musk of dried herbs, and faint metallic bite of scorched iron. The laboratory breathes like a beast asleep, its belly filled with glass tubes and brass instruments that glint under flickering gaslight. The benches are cluttered with jars, powders of every shade, liquids swirling like captured storms. And amidst this clutter, men in waistcoats move with an unsettling calm, as though they are priests performing a ritual. You hover near the doorway, unnoticed at first, watching a doctor in round spectacles bend over a patient's arm. The patient, a gaunt man with sallow cheeks, does not resist as the doctor slides a needle beneath his skin. The syringe is filled with morphine, pure, precise, distilled from the poppy's dream. The man shudders once, exhales, then slumps as though finally surrendering the fight he's been waging against his own nerves. The doctor adjusts his spectacles, satisfied. Around him assistants scribble notes, measuring doses and timing reactions. They whisper about standardization, about scientific advancement. To them, morphine is not a vice, not a bottle in a poor man's coat. It is progress, a tool of medicine. But you see the tremor in the patient's hand, the way his eyes dart open again, as if already yearning for more. You know, though they may not yet admit it, that this progress will carry its own shadow. At another bench, a younger physician demonstrates chloroform to a cluster of students. He holds a handkerchief soaked in the liquid, pressing it gently over the nose and mouth of a volunteer. Within seconds, the volunteer's eyes flutter closed, his body limp. The students exchange excited glances, jotting frantically in their notebooks. The doctor beams. Imagine, he says, operations without agony. Surgery, swift and humane. The words hang heavy in the air. Humane, you want to believe it. Yet you also remember the boys in the alley, giggling as they inhaled the same vapor for sport. In one room, chloroform is hailed as the future of medicine. In another, it is a cheap thrill. Same liquid, different story. The laboratory hums with this tension. Glass rattles faintly as liquids are poured from one vessel to another. Candles hiss in the draught, casting long shadows of flasks and coils onto the walls. The men here believe they are taming chaos, pinning it neatly into bottles and vials. But the chaos seeps through, always. You smell it in the sharp sweetness of ether, hear it in the nervous laughter when a rat, dosed with some new concoction, convulses too quickly. You drift closer to a set of bound volumes stacked carelessly on a table. Their spines red lancet, British Medical Journal. You flip one open, the pages rough under your fingertips, the ink dense with confidence. Case studies parade before your eyes, patients soothed by laudanum. Women comforted with chloral hydrate, children's fevers eased with powders laced with cocaine. The tone is clinical, detached. Side effects are noted with brisk efficiency, tucked at the edges like afterthoughts. And here, between the lines, you feel the heartbeat of the age. Victorians did not only crave drugs for comfort. They craved validation, the assurance that science blessed their indulgence. When a physician's prescription matched what the chemist sold on the street, it transformed a vice into a treatment. A bottle carried not shame, but authority. One student, eager to impress, approaches a professor with a question. He asks whether morphine might be used to ease nervous conditions in respectable ladies, hysteria, sleeplessness, melancholy. The professor strokes his beard, nodding gravely. A delicate dose administered with discretion may calm the mind most admirably. The student beams, scribbles furiously. You nearly laugh. You've seen these ladies already, sipping cordial in their drawing rooms. The discretion, more liberal than the textbooks suggest. The room buzzes again as another demonstration begins. This time it is coca, powdered, tinctured, dissolved in wine. The lecturer extols its virtues, its power to invigorate the wary, sharpen the intellect, strengthen the constitution. He sips dramatically from a goblet, his cheeks flushing, his voice quickening. The students lean forward, captivated. He cites explorers, scholars, even politicians, all strengthened by coca's touch. To him, it is not a vice, it is vitality incarnate. You imagine the students, years later, becoming doctors themselves, prescribing with the same conviction. And you know how easily their vitality will bleed into dependency, how the line between treatment and indulgence is thinner than the glass vials they handle. The laboratory grows warmer as the night deepens. Gas lamps hiss louder, shadows crawl higher. You wander past shelves stacked with bottles labeled in Latin. Tinctura opii, spiritus aetheris, chlorodyne. Each name whispers promises and warnings alike. The dust on the shelves tells you these bottles have outlasted countless patients, countless experiments. They will outlast more. One assistant offers you a seat as if you belong here. He pours you a cordial laced with coca, unaware you are an intruder from another time. You sip it cautiously, the bitter sweetness coating your tongue, the warmth rushing through your veins. For a moment, you understand the thrill, the illusion of control, the belief that science has packaged comfort safely in glass. It feels modern, civilized, righteous. But then you notice the patient again, the one dosed with morphine earlier. He stirs now, his hand twitching, his lips forming silent pleas. The assistants busy themselves with measurements, but his eyes find yours. They are wide, desperate, begging. You know what he wants. More of the cure. The science may have soothed his body, but it has lit a hunger in his veins. You set down the goblet, suddenly aware of the trap. The laboratory, for all its polish, is only another theatre. Its stage dressed in brass and Latin instead of painted banners and street cries. The men here believe they have tamed the poppy, the coca leaf, the anesthetic ether. But you can see the truth in the patient's trembling hand. The substances tame no one. The professor clears his throat, addressing the room with a booming finality. Gentlemen, the future of medicine lies here, in precision, in science, in the mastery of nature's gifts. The students applaud, their pens scratching furiously. You glance once more at the patient, at the trembling hand reaching for a vial that will not be offered. Mastery, you think. Perhaps. But the price of mastery is always hidden in the margins. The night air greets you again as you leave, sharp and bracing after the laboratory's cloying warmth. The fog swallows the building behind you, but the glow of its lamps lingers in your mind. You've seen the street's carnival of cures, and now the laboratory's solemn rituals. Both promise healing, comfort, progress. Both mask the same shadow dependence, quiet despair. And yet, there are darker corridors still. Places where drugs are not sold openly in bottles or prescribed in clinics, but whispered about in hushed tones, hidden behind curtains, guarded with secrets. If you thought the laboratories offered unsettling glimpses, wait until you follow the trail into the underbelly, where addiction becomes not science or commerce, but survival. The fog clings tighter now, thicker than before, as though it wants to herd you somewhere darker. The streets, you know, the taverns, the chemists, the laboratories, fade behind you. Ahead lies silence, broken only by the faint shuffle of feet and the whisper of coins changing hands. The gas lamps grow scarce, their halos weaker, their glass sooted. You sense you are walking into the city's lungs, where smoke and secrets settle heavy. A crooked alley opens, its mouth gaping like a wound. The buildings lean over it, roofs sagging, windows blacked with grime. A faint glow seeps through the cracks, orange and flickering. Not the honest flame of a hearth, but the sly breath of candles shielded from prying eyes. You slip inside. The smell hits first, bitter smoke, sour sweat, something sickly sweet underneath. It coats your tongue, makes you swallow hard. Voices murmur low, urgent. Words slurred not with drunkenness but with fatigue. You follow the sound, pushing past hanging cloths and warped doors, until the space opens. You are in a den. Not the grand opium parlors painted in lurid Orientalist fantasies, all silk cushions and lacquer screens. This is something meaner, closer to the bone. A cellar, low, ceilinged, walls sweating with damp. Thin mats are spread across the floor, some already occupied by figures stretched out, their faces slack, their chests rising shallow. Pipes smolder, the faint curls of opium smoke catching the candlelight, drifting like ghosts between bodies. No one greets you. No one notices. They are beyond greetings. One man lies with his head in a woman's lap, his eyes half open, staring but not seeing. She strokes his hair absently, the movement mechanical, her own lips parted around a pipe stem. In another corner, two men share a flame, leaning close as though conspirators, their hands shaking but eager. You kneel beside one sleeper. His clothes are tattered but not filthy, his boots, though scuffed, are not cheap. He is not the destitute beggar the newspapers would have you believe haunted these places. His hands tell the story, instead once ink-stained. Perhaps a clerk, a man who held ledgers and quills, not shovels. He exhales a long, shuddering sigh, and for a moment his face softens. Relief. And you understand. In the streets, drugs are sold with flair, promised as remedies. In laboratories, they are catalogued, standardized, elevated. But here, in this basement den, they are neither cure nor progress. They are survival. For the clerk, the seamstress, the soldier who cannot shake battlefield echoes, the widow with children and no warmth in her bed. Each draws the pipe or bottle like a lifeline, not for pleasure but for quiet. A voice rasps near you. An old man, his face lined like cracked leather, gestures with his pipe. First time. His grin is toothless but not unkind. You shake your head faintly, though you say nothing. He chuckles, coughs, inhales again. The ember glows bright, then dims. You won't stay long, he says. They never do. First, they come curious. Then they come desperate. Then they don't leave at all. His eyes, milky with age, fix on you for a moment before sliding away. You move deeper. The air thickens, the smoke denser, your lungs heavy. Time feels strange here, slowed, softened, suspended. The city above continues its bustle, its carriages rattling, its bells tolling. Down here, those rhythms do not matter. Here only the ember's glow dictates the pace. In a corner, a young woman bends over a child, coaxing him to sip from a small vial. Godfrey's cordial you recognize instantly. Laudanum sweetened for infants. She rocks him, humming softly, her eyes hollow. The child's whimper fades. His tiny limbs loosening, sleep overtaking him with unnatural swiftness. The mother exhales, clutching him tighter. She does not smile, there is no joy here, only relief that, for tonight, hunger will not wake him. The sight burns itself into you. Medicine above, survival below. Same vial, different fate. A sudden burst of laughter jolts the room. At the far wall, a group of men, better dressed than most, pass around a long pipe. They are loud, careless, their accents polished. Students, perhaps, or sons of merchants. To them, this den is not necessity but novelty. They whisper jokes, mimic professors, exaggerate gestures of drunkenness. They are tourists in misery, knowing they can climb the steps and return to parlors and warm beds. The others ignore them. The den has seen their kind before. You sit, letting the haze coil around you. Your head grows light, your thoughts slow. The den does not force itself upon you. It simply waits, patient, knowing the pull will come. You think of the chemist's tidy bottles, the doctor's measured syringes, the street hawker's carnival cry. All of them point here, eventually. Here, where the polish is stripped. Where nothing is sold as cure or progress, only as pause. And in that pause, you glimpse the truth Victorians never wrote in their journals or newspapers. Addiction is not spectacle, not always ruin, not always depravity. Sometimes it is just exhaustion. Sometimes it is the only way to quiet a grief too sharp, a hunger too loud, a memory too jagged. The old man coughs again, harder this time, his chest rattling. No one rushes to him. They know. The den teaches its own kind of detachment. He steadies, wipes his mouth, and takes another draw. Life, breath by breath, smoke by smoke. The candles gutter low. Shadows crawl higher on the damp walls. The den drifts into silence, punctuated only by the faint crackle of embers. Around you bodies lie like fallen statues, each dreaming their own escape. You stand, unsteady, and slip back into the alley. The night air feels knife, sharp after the den's cloying warmth. You breathe deep, trying to clear the taste of smoke, the weight of sorrow. But you know it will cling to you, as it clings to the city itself. Above ground, London continues as if nothing festers below. Gentlemen sip port in parlours, ladies play piano, factories churn smoke into the sky. Doctors write confident prescriptions, chemists tally profits, lawmakers debate morality. And yet, beneath all of it, in the cracks and shadows, dens like the one you've just left breathe quietly, housing the truths no one wishes to see. You pause beneath a gas lamp, its halo trembling in the fog. You think of the street hawkers, the laboratories, the parlours, the dens. 4 faces of the same truth, a society both fascinated and terrified by its own hunger for escape. Victorians built walls, dressed bottles in Latin, hid pipes behind curtains, but the need remained, unstoppable, gnawing. And you realize something chilling. The den is not simply a relic, a corner of Victorian darkness to be left in the past. It is a mirror. Its shapes change, its names alter, its bottles are relabeled, but the hunger, the desperate, human hunger, remains. What you walked through tonight is not only history. It is the present. It is the future. The fog thickens again, swallowing the alley. You walk on, your boots striking softly, your breath pale in the lamplight. Somewhere behind you, the den exhales smoke into the night. A quiet reminder that beneath every shining city, there are always rooms like that, hidden, heavy, waiting. And you carry its echo with you. A final whisper from the Victorian underworld: the drug is never just the substance. It is the silence that follows.